Today's lecture is about the dichotomy between human and non-human cultures. Rather, the question is there such a dichotomy? Is nature different from culture? Or are they very different in the sense that nature is passive and culture is active? Culture is formed out of consciousness and nature is formed out of objects that do not have consciousness. It also sometimes refers to the difference between being animate and inanimate, that is having life and not having life. But there are very different ways of perceiving this relationship. In fact, there are many cultures across the world where there is no separation, where nature and culture are not even seen as different from each other. They are continuous, they are part of a continuous holistic reality. The whole idea that nature and culture are dichotomous or that they are different or they are dialectical began in the West during the period of Renaissance, when modern science developed as an objective, logical form of belief. During the formation of this science or the development of this scientific belief, a parallel set or a co-evolution of idea was that it is only humans, or rather the men, or rather even not even all men, but it was the white European men who have the maximum capacity for thinking, for intellect, and for building civilization. And since civilization was more or less equated with urban civilization, with buildings, with cutting down forests, with making man-made objects, in modifying the environment. Now, human beings, the men of that culture, they found a lot of pride in doing that. They said that we alone have the capacity, the technology, the know-how to rebuild our environment. And they kind of compared themselves with those people who were living in forests, who had not modified their environment. Rather, they had modified their life to the environment. So they thought that this is very superior. This is the way we dominate. This is the way we prove our superiority, that we can control nature, we can dominate nature, and we can replace nature with culture. And this dichotomous mode of thinking was then passed on through colonization to different parts of the world. But if we look back in history, if we look back to the ancient times, we find that almost all ancient religions of the world, like of the Hindus, Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians, they believed that natural creatures, natural objects were conscious and had human-like characters. And many of them were also deified and believed to be sacred. Even today, Hindus worship the sun god, they worship the ocean, they worship mountains, they worship rivers and trees. But this kind of belief systems was found even amongst the ancient Egyptians, amongst the Greeks and Romans, which were then replaced by Christianity or Islam, which did not believe in all those things. But even today, apart from Hinduism and Buddhism and other religions of South Asia, we find that such beliefs are very prevalent across the globe amongst the indigenous populations. In the early 1920s, anthropologist Edward Tyler had termed as animism the belief in soul. And he believed that the ancient humans developed this belief in soul through their reflective thoughts on various issues like issues of life, death, dreams, etc. And the ancient people, the indigenous people, not only believed in all this, in the soul, in the spirit, in life after death, but they also extended this belief to the non-humans. That is, there was soul and spirit in non-humans. Amongst the trees, there were the spirits of the trees, there were spirits of the forest, mountains, like that. And they also reflected these beliefs in their ritual actions and also to their relationship to the environment. And this is actually a very critical aspect, because as we believe, so we act. Now, those who believed that there was consciousness, and in fact, many of these things, as I've already mentioned, were worshipped as sacred. So, they did not have the exploitative or dominating relationship to environment, but rather there was respect, there was worship. So they believed that not only humans, but even non-humans had souls, spirits, and some of them they worshipped as gods. Nuremberg David, an anthropologist who worked amongst the forest dwellers in South India, has written how these forest dwellers look upon the forest as their parents. They say that they belong to the forest and the forest will take care of them, just like parents take care of their children. For example, the fact that every animate being has soul is reflected in the Hindu belief of transmigration of the soul, which says that the same soul migrates from one kind of being to another, that it goes through different births. We know about the Jataka tales, which tells about the previous births of the Buddha, and these were the non-human births of the Buddha. Totemism is a form of religion that is found in many parts of the world. In fact, it was quite dominant at one point of time before it was taken over by the doctrinal religions like Christianity. And here people believe that each lineage or clan, depending upon the people we are talking about, are descended from some non-human being. It could be a bird, an animal. It could also be an object of the environment. That is, it could be the sun, the moon, water, a tree. So, these natural objects are respected and also worshipped as their ancestors. They not only offer ritual worship, but they also consider it their sacred duty to take care of these particular species, who they consider as their kin, as their family, as their brothers and sisters. And not only then, but even now, after the initial objectified period of scientific thinking, modern science is also transforming. We have the science of ethology, which talks about animals and the study of animals as social and cultural beings. A lot of biological and medical research is also indicating that there is consciousness in the non-human world and that the objects in the environment are not totally passive. And there is also increasing realization that just like humans, animals can also communicate, though they have different modes of communication. And in many ways, they are much more similar to human beings than was considered earlier. Natural historians like Leontine have criticized the classical evolutionary theory, which believed that the environment was passive and that culture acted upon the environment to transform it. He said that it is not a relationship where one is dominating over the other or one is acting upon the other, but he gave the concept of co-evolution, which says that both nature and culture, or human beings and non-human nature, they interact with each other, they shape each other. One is not being passively acted upon by the others. And not only that, organisms who are in the environment are not passive recipients of the environmental forces. They actively engage with the environment to create their own niches. That is, they also transform the environment. We know that birds can build nests. So many other animals, they dig, they transform, they do many other kind of activities in which they are actively engaged, and that too in a very conscious way, in a purposeful way. And so this purpose, this consciousness is not limited to being to the human beings, but it is shared by almost all living creatures. Further research has also shown, like primatologists who are working with or who work with the non-human primates, higher primates like chimpanzees, gorillas, and baboons. All the action, like it was previously believed that animals only act upon instinct, or that the way they act is inbuilt into their genetic structure, and they are kind of passive transformation of these genetic indicators, these genetic the kind of, you can say, triggers in their brain that is transformed into action. But no, as more and more research is going on, it is shown that this is not as instinctual as we believe, but it is also based upon creativity. Now, earlier, the main difference between humans and non-humans was seen as the unique capacity of humans for creative action, for imaginative action, what we call as reflexive thought. But for example, Julian in 1994 did study different groups of chimpanzees, and he found that each group located in a different ecological niche has its own traditions of material culture. As we know that chimpanzees can make and use tools, but each group is doing it in a different way, in the sense that it is almost as if they have different cultures. And therefore, a kind of a misconception that creative behavior is only associated with verbal communication is now being replaced by thinking or work or evidence that non-verbal communication, or what we think is non-verbal communication, is equally capable, may not be to that degree, but again we do not know the degree, is capable of transmitting messages from one to another. And therefore there is this possibility, as it was found amongst these chimpanzee groups, that culture is transmitted from one generation of chimpanzees to another. So we have these two philosophical thoughts. One is dualistic, one is monistic. Dualism believes that the things are opposed to each other, that our thought process or even the world is organized around differences. And monism believes that there is no difference. There are differences of degree maybe, but there is no radical difference between one thing or the other. And more anthropologists who have worked with indigenous people have discovered these kind of monistic cosmologies, where the people consider the non-humans to be just like humans. For example, the Jivaro of the Amazonian forest, who was studied by Descola, consider that plants and animals are just like humans who live in their own societies. They just have kinship, family, their own society, their hierarchies, their marriages, just like human beings. But only when they interact with human beings, they pretend not to be like what they are. And that is probably some other, their own way of interaction. And therefore, these indigenous people, like again many more indigenous people across the world, they enter into social relationship with humans, and these are seen as bound by the same rules and principles and social norms that bind human societies. Like the Jivaro considered the games that they hunt as their affines or their in-laws. So they are like their in-laws and they have same kind of relationship with them. The women who plant the do plantation, they plant saplings, they consider them as their kin, their blood relations. And emotions, reason, consciousness, these are attributed to all plants and animals. Like the Bhotiyas of Uttarakhand, they consider the forests in the upper Himalayas as imbued with spirits that are again conscious, and not only conscious, they have all the human emotions, because they consider that the Deodar trees have orange and red blossoms, which they consider as their garments, their adornment, their ornaments. And they restrict all humans from wearing these colors, that is red, orange and yellow, in the upper ranges of, in their higher altitude villages, because they feel that the forest spirits will get jealous, and when they get jealous, they will harm them. So emotions like jealousy, emotions like anger, emotions like care, love, these are all attributed to the non-human part of the universe as well. Then there are different ways of evaluation. Each community has its own way of evaluating this consciousness, this lifelike qualities. Like again, these Himalayan pastoralists, they arrange the animals by their, the size and shape and their relationship to humans. Some they consider having very much more human qualities, having more human characters than some others. Like horses are more like human than insects. Sheep and goat are more like humans than, say, rabbits, like that. The pastoral communities that rear animals, who live with these animals, give them human qualities and extend their social relationships to these animals. They are part of their families, their kin groups, their villages. Like again, these Bhutiyas never eat any animal from their own flock. And if only an animal dies accidentally, it is eaten. But even out of this, the female animal, who is seen as a mother animal, as a nurturant animal, as somebody who has helped them nurture and produce their animal herds, she is given a respectful burial and not eaten. Similarly, animals are also given personhoods. Personhoods meaning the characters, psychological characters. Some are seen as mild, some are seen as capable of anger, some are seen as hungry, some are seen as greedy, some like particular kind of environment. So they interact with these animals, anticipating not only that they are conscious or they have emotions, but also that they have moods, that they have different ways of being at different times. Like sometimes they can be angry, sometimes they can be in a passive mood, sometimes they can be in a caring mood. So one has to relate to them in that way. And not only just individual animals and entities, but entire landscapes are also seen as being conscious. The entire forest is seen as a living entity, just like the Palians who live in South India. They consider the entire forest as a conscious, loving, caring, parental being. The Bhotias consider the forests in the upper reaches of the Himalayas as something that wants peace, that cannot tolerate anybody talking loudly or it doesn't want to be disturbed. It doesn't like people going there and doing anything inappropriate, and it has a tendency to get disturbed. It has a tendency to get jealous, get angry. And also historical landscapes. We also know of historical landscapes amongst the Hindus, like we have the concept of sacred places where sacred births have taken place, or some sacred actions have taken place. Like the upper Himalayas, there is this whole route which the local believe were taken by the Pandavas when they went up to the higher reaches in search of the divine location. But when we look at the dualistic philosophy, where nature is separated from humans, we find under this dualistic philosophy, what is most acutely expressed in the modern market culture, the modern capitalist culture, the monetized economy. Here, the social relations are not extended to society, but only an exploitative relationship exists. We do not look at nature or its various parts as conscious, as human, but just objects, as resources which can be destroyed or exploited or used. Environmentalists are trying to go back to these ancient cosmologies, what they call as the Gaia philosophy or deep ecology, and opposing it to the modernist ones, indicating that this ecocentric cosmology is much better. What was existing for millions of years, where nature was seen as human, actually preserved not only nature but the human species as well. The anthropocentric philosophy, the dualistic philosophy, as we now see with global climate change, with the environmental disasters that we are facing on a daily basis, this has not been good for human survival. So, to treat ourselves as at the center of the universe, to say that humans are at the center of the universe and everything else exists for their use, is not the right way of looking at the universe, looking at our nature-human relationship. We have to understand that's a kind of monastic philosophy that has existed for so many million years, that had conducive to human development, evolution, and the building of human civilizations. There was some reality to it. We cannot say today that nature is passive. Nature is active and nature is striking back at us, because as the indigenous people would say, nature is unhappy, nature is angry, and nature has her own emotions. Thank you.